So we talk about the uninvolved parent.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let's talk about the uninvolved parent.
Mm-hmm.
This is, again, summarize uninvolved again.
So again, if we're thinking about the ingredients of control and warmth, this is a parent that really lacks both the control and warmth. It's very low on both ends. So this might be a parent that is either physically uninvolved, like they're just not in the household, or it could be a parent that's very emotionally uninvolved, like they're just sitting in the den on their phone constantly. And so a child's not really getting a lot of that guidance.
So let me play devil's advocate. Okay. You have
Sure.
a parent that is struggling to make ends meet, especially now with the way the economy is, right?
Yeah.
They're struggling to make ends meet. They've got to work.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not in the house. So let's be clear to our listeners that there may be somebody else in the home,
Totally.
like a babysitter
Yep.
or a grandparent, somebody that's helping raise those children. They have to instill that structure, consistency, routine, and predictability.
Yeah, exactly. And I think,
more.
right. And that could be a whole other podcast. So I think it's important to understand, like, of course, every family has their own unique challenges. And again, those are things we can work through in individualized treatment. I think what's important, though, is that a child still needs that warmth and control. And I think that there's actually even previous research that's found that it's not even necessarily just coming from that initial caregiver. It could be, honestly, like you said, it could be an aunt, it could be a cousin, it could be an older sibling, even in some ways. It could be a grandmother. It could even be, like you said.
I'm bringing up grandmother for
I
a
know.
reason, right?
Well, I'm not pregnant, if that's what the listeners are thinking.
But one day I'll be a grandma.
Yes,
right?
yeah.
So I'm
Just had to make that very clear because I am your daughter. So when you said that, I was like, why are you saying grandma right now? But yeah, no, I do think that it's more about, actually, a caregiver can be a very broad topic, right? It doesn't have to just be a parent. But again, this is important for parents to hear.
So for the uninvolved parent, the child often feels lost, confused, often alone in their feelings.
Mm-hmm.
They also tend, similar to a permissive, to be kind of disrespectful.
Yeah.
They ignore their parent. They just lack empathy towards their parent,
Right.
similar to permissive.
Right.
So as far as how they treat their parent, I find the uninvolved parent, the child is just also has that disrespectful. They're almost PO'd.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, honestly, if we're using like the seesaw analogy, it's almost like someone with permissive, right? It's like the warmth is completely weighing it down. And so the control piece is like kind of out of sorts. So that's where the child has to like push the control down. I would say with uninvolved, the seesaw is kind of broken, right? There's really not any way for the child to feel that control at all. And there's not any emotional support for them to feel like, okay, let's fix this together. So they're feeling very much like, how do I even get on the seesaw?
And so would you say that all parents have a little bit of everything? And when we're talking about being an uninvolved parent, I get life is tough, right? And some parents are like, well, I'm doing the best I can.
Yeah.
And so we want parents to understand we're not thinking all the time, but if the majority of your parenting, even if you're working full time, because it's quality over quantity.
Exactly.
And if you have more of an uninvolved way, and it could be one parent versus another,
Yeah.
so the child acts differently towards that other parent.
Right.
And that's also very confusing to parents. Why is my child different with me than their partner is?
Yeah.
And so that's important for our listeners to hear and talk about through therapy as well.
Yeah. And I do think that a lot of times navigating the parenting styles and getting a deeper sense of generally where are we, how were we raised as children, and how is that impacting how we're now parenting. I just think there's so many pieces to parenting. So this is obviously one podcast, but this could be a whole series of episodes because there's so much to dive into, like with parenting. But I agree. I do think that, and even if we're going deeper, I think there's parents that as kids get older feel like they need to adjust their parenting styles, which might not come as naturally to them. Like, oh, I need to become more permissive because now my child's a teen. But again, research has found that no, authoritative parents are still just as effective as we get older. And we need to understand what that control looks like.
Yep. No, these are all great points. And like you said, this could be a whole series on parenting.
Yeah.
And different subtopics.
Exactly.
So this is just one aspect and
Exactly.
kind of giving a broad overview. Mm-hmm. So in addition to the child kind of feeling lost and confused and alone in their feelings, kind of disrespectful to parents. Well, they are disrespectful. I see it in my office where they're like, the kids are almost sitting in a whole different place than their parents.
Right.
They don't open up as easily because the give and take and open communication and dynamic is not present.
Yeah.
This can be a child that's a little bit older that just doesn't have an open kind of give take. Parents don't even know how to talk to their child.
Yeah. Well, and think about it this way. If a child grew up with their parent more so uninvolved, right? Like whether that's physically or emotionally, there's a lack of trust that they have with a lot of individuals, right? So you have to think about that of even starting the treatment process, it might just be building trust with the child because of course they're not going to be willing to open up. And of course, that's why there's such slower treatment progress compared to maybe some other. So I think it's a lot of it is that lack of trust.
That's interesting. That's really interesting. And so we can see just listening to you describe this, how you can't just drop your kid off in therapy.
Yeah, exactly.
And hope for the best. That if you come to us and these are some things that we're seeing, we want to take your hand and say, hey, let's talk about this.
Yeah.
And I would say the families I work with, when we really get it down in the trenches, as I call with parenting, that's what they tell me, that the thing that changed the most for them is how their relationship changed with their child.
Yeah.
And so it's not fix my kid. It's, hey, how can we work together as a team?
Yeah.
That whole person approach, not just cure my kid, make him talk, get him to talk in school. It's all I want. And we get calls like that. I want my kid to talk in school, but whoa. Give me an IEP. Give me a 504. What do I do? It's like, whoa, step back, Jack. Like we got to kind of figure this out.
Yeah.
And as we're doing selective mutism evaluations for families, we're kind of starting to pick up on parenting. We see it in session and we are very constructive and we're very supportive. And that's how all these therapists that are working with kids need to be. But parents that are listening to this and therapists that are listening to this piece is so huge in this population.
Yeah. And I would say, even when we think about, we're talking about parenting, but when we think about these 4 styles, right? And we think about those ingredients of control and warmth, is that as therapists, we also model that with our families, right? Like when I'm working with families, I'm also always thinking about how can I provide structure, routine, predictability? Like how can I give them that control, right? I provide control, but I also provide a lot of warmth in my sessions and I listen to parents and I talk to them. So I'm modeling that for them so that they see and that they feel, wow, I see why this is so effective, right? Like I understand, I go into sessions with Dr. Jenna and it's like, okay, we're doing this, this, and this. But then also, of course, if there's a time where this goal didn't work or this game didn't work, we talk through it and she's giving me that helping hand. So I model that a lot in my sessions because I want parents to see what their kids might be feeling.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. And when you see some kind of what I call maladaptive stuff going on in session, we might gently talk to the parent and say, hey, I know when you were talking to Rebecca, for example, this is what happened and this came up and because you're frustrated, I can see that. Let's talk about how we could have done that differently.
Right.
And then all of a sudden you see the parent get these aha moments in session. Wow, that makes sense. And I can see how at home when I'm doing X, Y, and Z, maybe I wasn't handling it. And I'm like, look, don't beat yourself up.
Yeah.
The reason you're here is we can work together to help you see these things and help you really parent. And they're usually just so appreciative. They come so open.
Definitely.
But to get back to this, the uninvolved, because we keep going off on these tangents, a podcast on each of these parenting styles.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And possibly that's what we do.
Yeah, this is just kind of a general sense, but I think this is really helpful.
So that with the child that doesn't open up and we're talking about the need for trust and that kind of open communication, then that dynamic isn't present. The child lacks, again, similar to the permissive parent, in the permissive parenting style, that motivation for change. Why change or try?
Yeah,
who cares? Nobody cares.
Exactly.
Doesn't really matter. Whereas the permissive parent, I can do what I want. It's no big deal.
Right.
Like mom won't, it's a no big deal. So they kind of present on the surface, permissive and uninvolved, somewhat similar in their response to treatment. I know the parenting's different. So again, that child feels completely out of control.
Right.
And it's a slower treatment process.
Right. But it's interesting because those are 2 of the parenting styles where there's such low control. So it's interesting that those are the 2 parenting styles that we find where the child feels the most out of control. We'll obviously talk about authoritarian right now, but I do find that those are the 2 types of parenting where a child's feeling so out of control because there's no control and there's either only warmth, which is permissive, or just neither for uninvolved.